Hey folks, hope everyone's doing well. I'm still grading everyone's papers. I thought I would be able to get through everything by the ending of this week, but I want to be very thorough. I wanted to be thorough when I said it, but it's probably you're going to start hearing from me beginning Monday. So wanted to make sure I denote that change. Also, I'm going to send you a new syllabus next week because of the snowstorm and other things. We're a little bit off on the syllabus. Right now we're going to cover this week we're covering chapter 5, next week covering chapter 6. But I still want to make sure that the syllabus reflects where we are. And I think it's off by around 2 weeks because of the storm. So in this chapter, we're talking about civil rights. And civil rights are rights centered around the concept of equal treatment that the government is obliged to protect us as citizens. It protected us against public discrimination, which is discrimination by national, state, and local governments. Private discrimination, which is discrimination by individuals and private businesses. Equality of opportunity, which is the expectation that citizens may not be discriminated against by race, gender, national background, and every citizen should have an equal chance to succeed in life. That really leads to the pursuit of the American dream. Those of us who are immigrants, I'm including myself, my family migrated from the Caribbean. We come here in pursuit of the American dream. And one of the premises behind the American dream is the equality of opportunity. Again, expectation that citizens are not discriminated against by race, gender, or national background, and every citizen should have an equal chance to succeed in life. Equality of outcome, which is quite significant from opportunity. That is the expectation that equality is achieved if results are comparable regardless of race, gender, and nationality, meaning we all are guaranteed the same results no matter what. And so equality of opportunity means we're all given the same opportunity regardless of the way we look, regardless of our racial background, ethnicity, gender, age. And equality of outcome means no matter what you put in, we all achieve the same outcome. Some have argued that actually is the premise for socialism. So, couple of cases that really help define where we are in civil rights. Dred Scott versus Sanford, which was in 1857. And that's when the Supreme Court declared that blacks could not be citizens and Congress could not ban slavery in the territories. So there was actually a Supreme Court decision that held up slavery and said that black people were not citizens. So the question of who should be a citizen continued to erupt and continued to come up. And we've noticed in America a continuation of legal cases determine our laws. So right now, Dred Scott actually upheld slavery. And that's how one of the examples how civil rights was suppressed by the government. In figure 5.1 in your textbook, which is excellent, it shows how increasingly we gained equality and participation, and it has been a very important theme in the Constitution and our constitutional amendments. That's in figure 5.1, and it gives a really good each year and good examples of how we've continued to increase our equality and participation, which is important, has been a very important theme in our continued amendments to the Constitution. So during the Reconstruction Period, and that's the period that we refer to from 1865 to 1877, that's where former Confederate states, they gained readmission into our Union, and the federal government passed laws to help free the slaves. So Reconstruction is during 1865 to 1877. And that's where Confederate states gained readmission into the Union, and federal government then started to look at like the Dred Scott case and other laws and started to pass laws to free slaves. One of the things that happened was the Equal Protection Clause. That prevents states from denying any person equal protection under the laws. So we're starting to see the reversal, starting to see acknowledgement of Black people as citizens. Equal Protection Clause, again, prevents states from denying any person equal protection of the laws. It's the 14th Amendment in our Constitution. You also had poll taxes. Now, one thing we're going to see is that as Blacks started to gain certain freedoms, certain protections, other laws were also created to still quite prevent the continuation of the growth of the Blacks and slaves. So poll taxes is tax on voting, prohibited by the 24th Amendment. So why would they prohibit poll taxes? Because think about it. If you're a slave, you just received your freedom. You just received equal rights. How do you have enough money to pay to vote? And if you are saying that there's a taxation to vote, you have to pay to vote, then you're saying only a select elite group can be involved in the governmental and electoral process. So that was prohibited in the 24th Amendment. Jim Crow laws in the southern states. You had southern laws that established really strict segregation of the races and gave their name to the segregation era. So this was mostly in the southern states, and you have serious segregation of races, meaning facilities and areas only for Blacks, facilities and areas only for whites. Then after that, you would see the separate but equal doctrine. And that's a Supreme Court doctrine that upheld segregation as long as there were equivalent facilities. So, in other words, in the Jim Crow laws in the South, you had separate facilities for schools for Blacks, and you had separate schools for whites. And according to the separate but equal doctrine, the Supreme Court said that's fair if the facilities truly are equal. And what we were discovering more and more is that the facilities were not equal. So we're seeing the Black movement. Civil rights is Black women, all of the people who at one point were not allowed equal access, were not allowed certain freedoms, were suppressed. And so we're seeing the Blacks from slavery to becoming freed. There was also a women's suffrage movement, meaning many women could not vote. Women could not vote. Women could not own property. Women did not have many of the rights that men had. And so with the Black movement, you also saw a movement of the women's suffrage movement. So, states control voting laws. We saw that in the last election. Each state took forever to announce who the winners were because each state had a different way of allowing people to vote. Each state had a different way of counting the votes. And so states control their voting laws. Women's suffrage advocates campaigned at the state level, right? So each state had their own laws about who could vote, how you vote, and so the women's suffrage movement was different in each state. The 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, and that said women could vote in some election and in most states. The 19th Amendment superseded any state law that said women could not vote, and it stated that the right to vote should not be denied according to sex. So the 19th Amendment, because in some states they were a little slower than others to allow women to vote. So the 19th Amendment said it's superseding all laws and that women throughout the country were now allowed to vote. So we're seeing how the laws in the past were used to suppress certain groups, and now we're seeing how laws have continually evolved. Our Constitution has evolved. Many amendments have brought certain rights to certain groups. So, state action. Again, remember, especially with voting, each state governs their own laws, and they still do. Action by state, as opposed to a private person, that constitutes discrimination is an equal protection violation. In other words, even though each state was allowed to make their own laws, there was a universal equal protection, which meant is if the state proposed a law, for instance, that discriminates on behalf of a woman, a black person, then therefore it is a violation of equal protection. So even though some of the states were slower to give rights, nationally you saw stuff like the equal protection and other amendments to the Constitution superseding any state law, the 19th Amendment. In Table 5.4 of your textbook, it identifies the groups at the forefront of civil rights engagement. And it's a very good table. Please make sure that you look at it closely. A couple of other acts that we need to make sure we focus on, not just for this class, but you'll hear it repeatedly. Brown versus Board of Education. In 1954, the Supreme Court struck down segregated schools. Remember that act that said, if it's legal if you have equal but separate? Well, we were finding out more and more these separate facilities were not equal. And so Brown versus Board of Education struck down any type of segregation in schools. Civil Rights Act. It prohibited discrimination in employment, education, public accommodation. This was passed in 1964. So any type of discrimination you have in employment, education, or places of public accommodation, those were all removed. Voting Rights Act. It gives the federal government the power to prevent discrimination in voting rights. Perfect example. When Texas passed their voter ID law, many nationally felt that it was discrimination. And that's the law in Texas that you have to have a formal ID, like a license, military, gun license, passport. I mean, it gives you many examples. But some felt that that discriminated. And it was challenged nationally, but struck down and still held as legal. So it gives federal government the power to prevent discrimination, and that was the act that many sought and took the voting Texas ID law. But so far it's been held as legal. We have seen dramatic increases in people of color. It continues to happen ever since the rights and allowance into the process. And we've also seen many elections. For instance, remember we talked about at one point, our elected officials did not look like the population. And we're seeing that change more and more. Seeing many more Blacks, Latinos, women getting engaged and getting involved. And on both sides, in Texas specifically, we have now a Black man who is in charge of the Republican Party statewide. And on the Democrat side, we elected our first Latina, Sylvia Garcia. And so you're seeing a lot of transition and movement on both sides in both parties, in reflecting more diversity in our elected officials and our election process. Equal Pay Act. So we're talking about equal access to voting, to public facilities, public accommodation, education. Also, we're talking about equal pay. And so the Equal Pay Act prohibits difference for males versus females. You will often hear this really goes into play sometimes during the presidential cabinet. For instance, the first Black woman to be in a cabinet ever was under George Bush, Dr. Condoleezza Rice. And then you saw with President Barack Obama, the first Black man elected. And so with each president, you also look at their cabinets and the pay of each. But equal pay goes beyond just politics. It goes, if you are working side by side and you have the same qualifications as your male counterpart, the Equal Pay Act identifies that and says that you should have also the same pay. So, I want to add a new battle. So civil rights it started with Blacks, women, Latinos. Now we're seeing from the homosexual, lesbian, gay community. They are now fighting for their rights. And so you've seen civil rights. Usually some people think of civil rights, they only think of Black people, or they may only think of women. Civil rights encompasses everyone that were discriminated against and were not allowed the same rights as their counterpart. So it has involved Blacks, women, Latinos, gay and lesbian, just throughout our time. And through these lawsuits, each different group has been allowed to get more rights and equal access. Let's see, I think that's all I have for chapter 5. Oh, it also goes into the rights of those incarcerated, and that continues to evolve. Do people in jail, should they have the right to vote? That's been a question that many have been asking for decades. And you've seen many lawsuits that continue to evolve to give more and more rights. Some felons can actually run for office, and once upon a time that was not the case. It depends on what type of felony, it depends on what kind of office, but there are increased rights for those communities as well. So again, I am probably a little bit more than a third of grading your paper. I'm continuing to grade. There are over 100. Thank you for your patience. As always, as you're reading this chapter, if there's any questions at all, please do not hesitate to email me. And I will get back to you starting on Monday, as I said, with your exam grade. And I'll also give you a new syllabus. I hope you guys are staying safe. Hopefully we won't have any more. 2021 has been, oddly, at the beginning at least, just as weird as the other year. But anyway, you guys take care and stay safe. And you'll see me again next week. Bye.